Well, hello, Nats fans, and welcome to another edition of the DoDCast. I'm Drew Douglas, and I'll be your host for tonight. And we only do these once a week in the regular season, or in the spring training exhibition season. But I'm very excited because the British accent is back after a couple long weeks. And tonight, I have the great pleasure of being joined by Blake Finney. And how are you tonight, Blake?
I'm good, thanks, Drew. I just can't wait for some actual regular season baseball now. I think the spring training novelty's worn off a bit, and I can't wait for the games to count.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. At the beginning, it's very exciting because baseball is finally back. You don't see the stars too much, but there are actual professional baseball players out there on the field playing baseball. But yeah, now it's just kind of monotonous and still about 3 weeks away from the regular season, but I'm sure that time will fly here.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm. And so early in the spring training exhibition schedule so far, we've seen some position battles, but the Nats don't have too many spots open. But Victor Robles has really impressed, at least for me so far. What have you seen from him?
Yeah, I think we've seen all the tools that everyone's hyped up as he's come through the minor leagues. So when he's been in single A, double A, and then even the majors with like his speed, his defense, that's so game breaking. We've seen a couple of the highlight reel plays in center. So he's really lit up spring training for the Nets so far.
Yeah, I've been very excited. And like you said, his whole time coming up, we heard a lot about him. He's always the Nationals' top prospect, as well as being one of the top prospects in MLB. And we've seen Rizzo reluctant to trade him for guys like Chris Sale last all season, but he impressed in that cup of coffee last year, even making the postseason roster, and he's now off to a great start today. He didn't start, but he came in towards the end of the game, and he hit an RBI single again today. So he's really been performing well, like you said, defensively in the outfield. He can play all three positions. He's hit really well. He's got speed that could be game changing. Maybe not quite as fast as Trey Turner, but he's very fast. So I'm very excited to see him play. And do you think that maybe he could make the opening day roster?
I still think it's such a slim chance just purely because the Nationals have their three set outfielders to start off the season. I think the soonest we might see him up is kind of end of May, start of June. I guess it depends. Depends firstly on injuries. Obviously, we know how they can strike at the least expected time, like we saw with Eaton last year. But I guess the other variable in that is, can Taylor sustain last season's form? And if he can't, then maybe we start to see Robles eat into that time, maybe a timeshare in center.
Yeah, and I was with you for most of the spring training, but now Taylor has a little bit of a side problem. He hasn't played in about a week, and he was battling an oblique injury last year. So hopefully it's not a recurring thing from last year, but I don't know. I think there might be a chance that Robles could make the opening day roster just because Taylor's hurt now. But like Rizzo and David Martinez have said, Robles is going to be playing every day regardless of what level he's at. So I think if he's in the bigs, it probably means Taylor's hurt. And for Taylor's sake, that's really not good because the way Robles has been playing, if he's impressing and then Taylor comes back, then you really have a big dilemma in not knowing what to do because just Robles has been so exciting. And well, Taylor was good. He's not the Nationals' top prospect.
Yeah, I think you can compare it to when they kept Trey Turner down a couple of years ago. They kept him down until like end of July, I think. Even though they had Espinosa occupying short, they didn't want to bench Espinosa at that point because he was such a whiz with the glove. And they obviously wanted Turner to get as much game time as possible.
Right. And then the Nationals, they really just have so many great outfielders. Obviously, you have Bryce Harper, who's one of the best players in the game. Taylor and Robles, who we've talked about. Adam Eaton is coming back this year. But all those guys kind of make Brian Goodwin a guy without a spot. And I wrote a little bit today about how they could possibly trade him. What do you think they should do with Brian Goodwin?
I don't think there's a lot wrong with keeping him because I think down the road he's not going to be the star-studded outfielder that, say, Bryce Harper is. I guess he could start for a lot of teams. And I think there is quite a bit of trade value because he's got, I know he's quite old by prospect standards, but he's got, I think he's got about 5 years of control left. So the teams like Miami or Tampa Bay could look at that and look at it favorably.
Right. And yeah, I said that I think they should hold on to him as a fourth outfielder because last year he didn't exactly put up eye-popping numbers. He hit about 250 with 13 homers, a handful of stolen bases, but that was only about 74 games, and most of those games were coming off the bench, maybe just getting an at bat or two. So I think he kind of got his feet wet in the majors last year, and he could really play well this year as a fourth outfielder. And even if somehow everyone stays healthy, he'll get his at bats, whether it be pinch hitting or just giving an outfielder a day off.
Yeah, definitely. Even I think we saw a lot of it last year where the Nationals were on their way to clinching and he got plenty of game time towards the end as they rested up Harper Taylor.
Yeah, and then kind of like Robles a little bit, trying to maybe make the team. We have a guy like AJ Cole, who you'd think the fifth spot in the rotation is kind of his to lose, but he hasn't really pitched that well this spring. So, what are your thoughts on Cole in that vacant fifth spot in the rotation?
I think the big thing with Cole is that he's out of options now. It's not like you can send him down to the minors like they have done before. So it kind of puts the pressure on him to make an impression. Obviously, he doesn't have to completely outpitch Feddy because Feddy can go back to AAA, probably needs a bit more seasoning. I think the stuff's there with AJ Cole. You see a nice fastball, good slider. It's just, can he command it? Because obviously when he blew up against Houston the other day, it wasn't fantastic. So I guess we'll see how he pitches in his next game.
Yeah, I think just because of what you said with him being out of options, he's definitely on the opening day roster, whether it's as the fifth starter or as a long man in the bullpen, because right now I think Sammy Solis is probably their long reliever with them lacking a bona fide long man. But yeah, he hasn't walked a whole lot of guys with his command problems. He has 7 strikeouts, only 1 walk so far this spring, but he's got about a 5.4 ERA, I believe, and most of that is because he's fallen behind hitters, go 2-0, 3-0, and then he's getting crushed. And the other day against Houston, he fell behind Marwin Gonzalez 3-0 and back-to-back at bats, and Gonzalez took him deep in the first at bat and then hit a warning track shot in the second at bat. So he may not be walking guys; it's not showing up on the stat sheet, but he hasn't really impressed me that much this spring.
Yeah, I think the other side of that is he then strikes out Altuve not long after the home run, I think. So the potential's there to definitely come into his own in the fifth role. And obviously, I think with the Nationals, if your worst problem is your fifth starter, you've got a pretty good team.
Right. And obviously, it's still very early in spring. He's going to have a few more starts throughout spring training, and he could get this settled in. We got 3 weeks till spring, or 3 weeks till opening day, and then in the fifth spot, it doesn't really matter. The Nationals have a fantastic top 4. So if Cole goes out there and gives them maybe a 4-something ERA in the fifth spot, I think they'd take that for sure. And then what do you think about Jake Arrieta? Because obviously he's still a free agent, and today Bovada gave their odds on the remaining free agents, and they said the Nationals were the second most likely team to sign him with 5-2 odds.
Yeah, I think I was looking at that. I think the Brewers were favourite at the moment. It still doesn't make a huge amount of sense for the Nationals right now until the price lowers. Obviously, if he comes in, he slots in at kind of 3-4, around the same where Gio is, and potentially replacing Gio down the road. But with the Nationals' luxury tax situation, I think they're about 10, 20 million over at the moment. So to go out and get Arrieta, you're kind of committing to this year.
Yeah, and we've seen other teams like the Yankees and the Dodgers reset their luxury tax, probably gearing up for next offseason when the Nationals' own Bryce Harper is going to be a free agent. So I think if they sign Arrieta, they may be very well taking themselves out of the Bryce Harper sweepstakes for next winter.
Yeah, I think it depends on the needs at the time because obviously, like we've just talked about, the Nationals have great outfield depth at the moment. Can they afford to lose Harper? Obviously, it's Bryce Harper. He's one of the game's best players. But do you feel the immediate need now for the starter and then deal with the holes in the outfield next season when they come?
Yeah, and I know it's an unpopular opinion, but if it were me, I would actually let Bryce Harper walk because obviously you have Robles coming up. And another prospect the Nationals have is Juan Soto. He's 19 years old. He's also an outfielder, and a scout recently said that Soto is the best hitting prospect he's seen in 20 years, and he compared him to Vladimir Guerrero, who just entered the Hall of Fame. So if Bryce Harper leaves, I think the Nationals are still set in the outfield for a long time.
Yeah, obviously, I don't think people will get quite up to Bryce Harper's standard right off the bat. Maybe Robles and Soto get to that standard one day. From what I've heard about Soto, he just hits. It's not all about power, but he's going to be someone who, probably a bit like Daniel Murphy, he'll work the count. He'll get his fair share of doubles and extra base hits, hitting about 330. So he can definitely be a menace in couple of years when he's due.
Right. And then assuming the Nationals don't sign Jake Arrieta, another guy competing with Cole for the fifth spot is Tommy Milone. And entering the spring, I really didn't think he had any shot at making the team. He was a former Nationals farmhand. He debuted with the team, but was traded to Oakland shortly after in the Gio Gonzalez trade. But he's really impressed this spring. He's had 3 appearances. He's thrown 6 innings with 6 strikeouts, and he's only allowed 1 base runner, which was a single in his first appearance. So he's really pitched well. Do you think he could be a guy that we see in Cincinnati on opening day with the Nationals?
I don't think it's out of the question. He's certainly pitched himself into the conversation. A bit like you, I didn't see him making much of an impression at all. Maybe someone to sit in the minors and just be an experienced hand to come up if injuries hit. But yeah, 6 innings, 6 strikeouts, no walks. But it's not completely out of the blue. He was a solid pitcher before when he was with Oakland and Minnesota. He had a few good seasons here and there, but obviously mixed them in with some pretty dreadful seasons, which has kind of left him on the scrap heap for the Nets to pick up. So it all depends on AJ Cole. I think it's primarily between those two now. Do the Nets want to expose AJ Cole to waivers? And my guess is they would lose him given his former prospect status.
Right. Yeah, I think if AJ Cole hits waivers, he's definitely pitching elsewhere. And that's kind of the deal with Tommy Milone, too. I think if he doesn't make the Nationals opening day roster, he's really set himself up well to be pitching somewhere else in the major leagues this year, especially with so many teams always looking for pitching. If you have an established veteran who's pitched well this spring, you can probably sign him for relatively cheap. I think a lot of teams would jump on that.
Yeah, I agree. There's he's one of the pitchers who could circle around and obviously be a semi-reliable arm. Obviously, you know what you're getting with Milone. You're not going to get a top 3 starter, but you're not going to get someone who's going to get lit up with a 9-odd ERA.
Right, and yeah, I'm rooting for Milone because I remember when he first came up, and obviously he was a decent prospect, but in his first at bat, he hit the very first pitch he saw in the majors for a 3-run homer into the Nationals bullpen. So that was a pretty cool moment, and just his pitching style. Today everyone is always going for strikeouts, throwing mid-90s to triple digits even, and Tommy Milone kind of sits in the upper 80s, more of a finesse pitcher, pitch to contact. So unorthodox pitcher and does have a little bit of history with the Nationals. I'm definitely pulling for him to make the team in some regard. And then another free agent on top of Arrieta that the Nationals have kind of been linked to a little bit is Jonathan Lucroy. And do you see the Nationals maybe making a run at him?
It's a tricky one. Again, options come into it once again, and whether you can expose a player to waivers or whatnot. And I think JP Morosi wrote that Severino has 1 option left, so it does make sense, and the Nationals can fit him in should they see the need. Obviously, I like what Wheaters has done so far this spring training, and that might be the deciding factor that actually, based on what we have seen, we're confident enough in Wheaters to go with Severino, who obviously his defense is streets ahead of his offense, and that's kind of what you want from a backup catcher. You don't need 2 catcher 1.5. They're not quite a number 1, but they're too good to be a number 2, and then the situation could get a bit tricky there.
Right, and I think I might make a run for Lucroy if you can get him for cheap because Severino, he is a pretty well-regarded prospect, but he's coming off of a bad year last year, and to be fair, he was battling injury, so that may not be what he's going to give you this year. And then Miguel Montero, he didn't have a great year last year. He was designated for assignment and eventually traded from the Cubs after he kind of talked bad about Jake Arrieta when the Nationals were stealing all over him. And he hasn't looked great this spring. He did homer today, so maybe he's turning it around, but I don't really know what you're going to get from Montero other than a veteran guy, someone that Dave Martinez is already familiar with from his days in Chicago. And Lucroy obviously is coming off of a down year, but I think if he could rebound, he could be pretty good again. And if he doesn't, he'll probably give you pretty similar to what Montero will give you.
Well, yeah, there's a lot to like about Lucroy. I remember in not last year, year before, he was probably the most sought after trade target when the Rangers got him, I believe, from the Brewers. And I seem to remember back then he was a really well regarded hitting catcher, not so much defensively. And it was injuries that kind of bit him a bit. So it would definitely be an upgrade. There's no question about that. You get someone who's proven it in the in the major leagues compared to Severino, who's obviously his defense is his calling card. But does it make sense for the Nationals again with the luxury tax issues they've seen?
Yeah, I think I would only sign him if you can get him for cheap because obviously you do have Montero and Severino already in tow. But the one thing I'm concerned about too with Lucroy is last year he was traded again at the deadline. He was traded to Colorado, and his numbers improved a little bit there. But if you look at his home road splits, there's a really drastic difference between when he was at Coors Field, when he was a good hitter, when he was on the road, when it was just absolutely dreadful, which is kind of what you'd expect from seeing a guy hitting at Colorado with the elevation.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is there really a surprise if someone's hitting better in Coors Field?
Yeah, and then, but I don't know. He was in. He's playing for Team USA in the World Baseball Classic last year, which we did see kind of result in some poor seasons for players in the WBC, such as Tanner Roark, for example, with the Nationals. So maybe that was kind of hurting him, not getting his typical preparation for the season. But yeah, it really wasn't a great season all around for Jonathan Lucroy last year.
Yeah, I guess it's another one of the players that's still surprised and is still out there given what they have done, even if they may be asking for too much right now. Surely by now they should be on a team they're that good.
Yeah, absolutely. And another guy like that, Mike Moustakas, and he still hasn't signed, but I did see just before we started this that the Royals had offered him a short-term contract, which be going back to where he's familiar, get possibly a one-year deal, and hit the market again next year, give it a shot. So what do you think about kind of Moustakas? You think he will go back to Kansas City?
It'll be interesting to see. I know he was long rumored for the Yankees, I think, until they traded for Drury. It's a tricky one. I don't get why more players aren't taking the one-year deal this offseason, because obviously you've got the absolutely stacked free agent class last year that a lot of teams will be going after the Bryce Harper, Clayton Kershaw, and then if they miss out on those, they've still got that money to spend on that second tier where some of these guys may be like Arrieta and Lucroy and Moustakas.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of going back to Severino, Ron Juckett said in the chat that he did a good job framing pitches this weekend. So it's kind of going back to what you were saying, where his defense is really his calling card. And his bat is behind, but it's typical for a backup catcher, as we saw with Jose Lobaton for so many years as the Nationals backup catcher.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you want from a backup catcher. They're not in there to hit, and you don't want them to lose the game by incorrectly handling the pitcher on the mound, for example.
Yeah, the only thing I would keep in mind is I think the Nationals this year are really going to use the backup catcher more than a typical backup, because try to keep Matt Wieters fresh. He lost 14, 15 pounds this year with improving his diet, almost going vegan. And so I think last year he obviously got off to the great start in April, and then he said that fatigue played a part in his struggles. So I think if the Nationals can limit him to maybe 100 games at the most, that'd be big, and obviously it's going to mean more playing time for your backup.
It's an absolute shock when a player said best shape of my life, he actually meant it for once.
Yeah, get that cliche every year, and usually just someone showing up in decent shape. But yeah, it's good to see Matt Wieters actually in great shape, and he probably is in the best shape of his life. And then another thing that we've kind of been keeping an eye on throughout the spring is Daniel Murphy, because he had that knee surgery shortly after the Nationals were eliminated last year, and he's been rehabbing it. I didn't think personally that he'd be back for opening day, but David Martinez has been saying he's on track for opening day, yet we still haven't seen him in a game, and the Nationals were playing meaningful games in 3 weeks. So do you think that he will be back for the regular season?
I think we talked about it when I was on 2 weeks ago. It's not going to be a surprise if we sit him out. We want him in October, not in April. All the same phrases we've been saying over and over again. I think the latest is he's hitting off a tee and doing some soft toss. So it's a step in the right direction, and it kind of backs up the theory that even if he does start on the DL, he's not going to be on for long, maybe like a couple of weeks at the most. So yeah, it's starting to get there, and then even if he needs a quick rehab assignment, that's fine. It's still April.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the other day it was announced that he was finally hitting on his feet. He was getting his work in. He reported when all the rest of the position players reported, but he was just taking one-handed swings off of a tee on his knee. So like you said, now he's actually on his feet hitting, which is a good sign. But I haven't heard anything about him running, which obviously is going to be big. So I wouldn't be like scared if he misses opening day. I think he needs proper preparation. Last year we saw him in the WBC. He's really struggling. Obviously, it didn't really affect him in the regular season, but he was struggling for Team USA and was eventually benched just because he didn't get his preparation. That's really when you're just trying to work things out. You're not supposed to be playing meaningful games. So if he doesn't get into some games here soon, I think we don't see him on opening day just because he's going to need to go see some minor league pitching or extended spring training or some sort of live pitching before being thrown into a regular season game.
Yeah, I think even more so with Murphy in the way he plays. He's a very strategic hitter. He waits for the right pitch, so kind of getting that game action is going to be key to him. It's not. I'm trying to think of a good example, but maybe not a typical power hitter who may just come up and swing for the fences, and you don't need that much preparation. Your game plan is to hit it hard if you hit it at all. Whereas Murphy, he likes to make contact. Like I said, he likes to see his pitches and make sure he gets the right one. So seeing some game time is going to be key for him.
Right. And if Daniel Murphy isn't on the opening day roster, it's going to come down to Wilmer Defoe and Howie Kendrick to play second base. And Kendrick has done pretty well. He's a veteran. He can play second base, outfield. He could kind of play all over. He'll be a big piece off the bench. But Wilmer Defoe has really struggled so far this spring. He just got his first hit the other day. So who do you think Nationals should go with between Defoe and Kendrick to play second base if Murphy isn't ready?
I think they want to go with Defoe. They want to kind of test him out, give him 2 weeks, if that's how long Murphy's out, give him regular game time at second base to see is he going to be there when or if Murphy leaves next season. But obviously you still have to win the game. So obviously Kendrick's hitting better now. I think Defoe's hitting 0.91. I've got written down. So that's not exactly pretty. But then again, Mike Trout's hitting 0.71. Are we concerned about him?
I wouldn't think so.
So I think, like I said, I think as it like if opening day was tomorrow, it would be Kendrick starting. There's obviously time for Defoe to come back and rebound, and he's obviously shown so far that he's better starting than coming off the bench. I don't know if that's a mentality thing for quite a young player, so it may be better in the long run to start Defoe over Kendrick.
Yeah, and I think Defoe, assuming he can kind of play like he did last year, he's definitely going to be their long-term starter at second base. Maybe even starting next year if Murphy departs in free agency this year. But I'm not really reading too much into his struggles so far this spring. Like you said, even Mike Trout is struggling. Last year, Ryan Zimmerman got out in each of his first 16 at-bats in the spring, which is exactly what Defoe has done so far. And Zimmerman went on to start at first base in the All-Star game. So Defoe, like you said, he's struggled in the past coming off the bench when he's not getting regular at bats, and maybe it's what we're seeing now, where obviously he wasn't getting regular at bats off of live pitching throughout the off season, and so maybe now he's just kind of working out some things, getting back into it, and by opening day we'll see him kind of perform it like we know he's capable.
Yeah, it's the whole point of spring training. Get back into the swing of things. You don't worry about the first couple of weeks. You maybe get slightly concerned if he's still not hitting a couple of weeks' time. But right now, I don't think there's much concern.
Yeah, and then another guy along with Murphy who's kind of coming back from an injury is Adam Eaton. And Ron asked about him in the chat. He asked if we were surprised that we haven't seen Eaton at all yet this spring. So he's coming back from the ACL surgery, and everyone's been saying he's going to be good to go for opening day. He will be eased back in spring training, but I kind of took that as, maybe get an at-bat and a few innings in the field every other game, maybe not play quite as much as the regular starters. But, opening day is in 3 days, and we haven't seen him in a game at all. So what are your thoughts on Eaton not playing yet?
I don't think it's surprising. It's probably slightly concerning that we haven't seen anything from Eaton. Like you say, it would have been nice to see him play like 2-3 innings just to get his feet wet. Obviously, he's been rehabbing a lot longer than Murphy. I think he's running. He's doing all the team exercises. He's just not playing in the games yet. So it could just be Davey Martinez trying to keep him fresh for the regular season, and then kind of rest him 2-3 times a week early on as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a bit odd because we saw him doing workouts with the team before the actual game started. We saw him shagging balls in the outfield. Even when the Nationals were taking live batting practice, he was taking his routes as if it was a real game. And from what I've read, he looked great. So I kind of expected him to be in these games. And it is a bit odd, but I'm not really going to read too much into it. I still think that we see him in left field on opening day.
Well, yeah, and there was all the talk of could he be back for the playoffs as well last season. And what was that? That was 6 months ago now, and he's still not playing games. So obviously, hopefully we'll start to see him within the next week or so, and then everything will be back on track.
Yeah, I think we do, but kind of like we were talking about earlier, the Nationals are all but guaranteed to win the division. I don't think they'll win it by quite as much as last year, but they still should win it relatively easily, and they need guys like Daniel Murphy and Adam Eaton in October a lot more than they need them in April. So it's better to be cautious with these guys and not rush them back just to be back for opening day and you end up aggravating the injury. And then kind of in the minor leagues, we saw Seth Romero, who was the Nationals' first-round draft pick last year, get sent home from spring training earlier this week because he violated curfew multiple times and was warned by officials and violated it, I guess, one too many times and was sent home for a little bit. What are your thoughts on Romero not being with the Nationals right now?
Yeah, I wrote a piece on him a couple of weeks ago, and then purely as a player, he's got infinite potential. Like, he reminds me a lot of a left-handed Strasburg, the way he throws, his repertoire, and his ability to strike guys out so easily. But obviously, the thing that's lingered and the reason he fell to the Nationals in last year's draft is the off-the-field stuff. So I think he failed a drug test at Houston and was caught fighting with his teammates. So obviously, missing curfew isn't quite as bad, and it's probably it's quite a minor thing. But you don't want it to be an indicator of things to come with Romero.
Yeah, just judging from his past, I was very concerned when I heard that he was sent back, just because we didn't know the cause yet. But now that I found out it was curfew, obviously it's something pretty stupid that can be very easily avoided. You know, just be back when you're supposed to be back. But it's not as bad as kind of what he's done in the past. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Hopefully, missing curfew isn't kind of a indication of what he's still up to and will get him into trouble down the road.
Yeah, I think there was a collective gasp from Nats fans when they heard, "Oh no, he's been sent home as he failed a drugs test. Is he going to get suspended by MLB?" And then it just turned out to be an internal thing. So it was a nice sigh of relief, and hopefully the Nationals can iron it out.
Yeah, and there was even a rumor that he was back with the team yesterday. Chelsea James of the Washington Post shot that down, said he's not back quite yet, but with it being such a minor infraction, I wouldn't be surprised if he was maybe back before spring training was even over and won't miss any time in the minors.
Yeah, he won't miss any games for the minor league team unless they just internally suspend him for a game as kind of a slap on the wrist. I don't think he'll make it back to Major League spring training. Obviously, he'll just go to the minor leagues when he comes back in probably a few days for something so minor.
Yeah, and it was kind of disappointing too because obviously he is a great pitching prospect. He was a top 10 talent, fell to the Nats, but we've kind of seen some of these guys that aren't with Major League spring training right now, but with the split squad, you need so many players. We're seeing some of these minor leaguers. And I was kind of hoping to see Seth Romero in one of these games, but getting sent home, that kind of hurt his chances to get into one of these spring training games.
Yeah, I think he'll really come into his own in the next few seasons if he can stay clean off the field.
Yeah, and he's the Nationals' fifth best prospect and their second best pitching prospect behind Eric Fetty. So we've heard that he could be a starter or reliever, and I'm really excited to see what he can contribute going forward. But he just has to be able to kind of keep everything together off the field in order to perform on the field. So that about does it for tonight. We'll go through what we ran on the site today. We had I wrote about if Brian Goodwin could be traded, which we talked about earlier, and Ron Juckett wrote about Gio Gonzalez being the Nationals' biggest pitching X factor. And then yesterday, Blake wrote about Austin Voth possibly rebounding in 2018. And you want to share a little bit of that on here?
Yeah, I think we've seen him a few times coming in for an inning or so, and then he was such a talked about Nationals prospect in 2016 when I think he had a 2.5 ERA in the first half, and then Strasburg went down. They called up Giolito instead, and then since then it went from bad. Well, it went from great to really bad, and he got sent down to AA last year. You kind of look at the stats, and it's there for a rebound. I know batting average on balls in play is quite a big one, and it jumped about 50 points. So there's certainly reason to believe he could rebound, and hopefully he could be another strong options for the Nationals in AAA if injuries hit.
Yeah, and he was sent down to minor league camp today, but he really impressed this spring in front of the major league coaching staff. And I wouldn't take that demotion as kind of a punishment or anything. It's just he's not going to make the major league team, so might as well go get his work done in the minors and let the starters get some more reps now that we're kind of getting into the end of spring training here.
Yeah, it's the Nationals kind of depth at the 5th starter spot. They've got so many choices now. We've talked about some of them right now. So Malone, Cole, Eric Feddy's nearly there as well. So it just kind of speaks to that depth rather than Voth isn't quite good enough yet.
Yeah, and if there are injuries again this year, I wouldn't be surprised to see Voth kind of getting a shot in the major leagues. And even without injuries, we could potentially see him as a September call-up with a solid year in the minors. So that'll definitely be something to keep an eye on throughout the course of the year. So we'd appreciate if you would like this video on YouTube, subscribe to our channel so you can watch all these DoDCasts. We're doing them weekly right now in spring training, unless something big happens, and we'll come on and do one. Maybe the Nationals sign a guy like Jake Arrieta, which we were talking about earlier. I'm sure we'll be on if that happens. And then we're going to be doing them after every game throughout the regular season. So I'm not going to want to miss these. We'll have some great coverage after every regular season game. And then give us a like on Facebook. And if you could follow us on Twitter at District on Deck. You can follow me on Twitter at DrewRD98. And Blake, how can they follow you?
You can find me at Finney Blake.
All right, so thank you very much for tuning in tonight. I hope you continue to enjoy the Nationals spring training throughout the rest of 3 weeks and are as excited for opening day as we are. So from Blake Finney and the rest of the staff at District on Deck, I'm Drew Douglas. Thank you for watching and have a great night, everyone.